This week on Personally Speaking, our guest is once again an old friend, Governor Mike Huckabee. He's appearing in a new movie called God's Not Dead, In God We Trust. Stay with us for a wonderful interview. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr. Jim Lisante, and Governor Mike Huckabee joins me now. Governor Huckabee served as the 44th governor of Arkansas from 1996 to 2007, becoming one of the longest-serving governors in the state's history. In 2008 and 2016, he ran for president, finishing second in the Republican primary in 2008. Governor Huckabee attended the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, and he became pastor of Beach Street Baptist Church in Texarkana. He's also the father of the current governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. It's the first time in American history that a father and a daughter have both served the same state as governor. Governor Huckabee guest stars in the new film God's Not Dead, In God We Trust, a movie that explores the relationship between faith, politics, and our civic responsibilities. Governor Mike Huckabee lives in Arkansas with his wife, Janet, and together they're the parents of 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren. He's here with us today to talk about God's Not Dead and God We Trust and why it's critical for us to make our voices heard through voting and serving others in our community. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome back to Personally Speaking, Governor Mike Huckabee. We're here with Governor Mike Huckabee, and this is a return for us. Governor, last time we were together was, to show you how long ago it was, I was on your Fox program, but then before that, we did a great interview about your book, Quit Digging Your Grave, and that's a while ago. So I'm so happy to have you back. And we're going to get into the movie, God's Not Dead, In God We Trust, in just a moment. But I got to ask the first obvious question. How does Governor Huckabee think Governor Huckabee is doing?
I think she's doing great. In fact, she tells everybody, I just want to be a better governor than my dad. And I always say to her, kiddo, it is a low bar. I'm pretty sure you already have cleared it. So relax and enjoy the ride. She's off to a great start, particularly with her education program. And one of the reasons I know it's a good one is because she's been sued about 6 times from teachers' unions and others.
That's a sign.
It provides mothers and fathers really the choice of where they want to put their children in school. And they can use the funding if they want to go to a private school, parochial school, they can homeschool. It's up to the parents. And I think that it's very difficult to get something like that passed. And she was able to do it overwhelmingly in the legislature. So it's a bold move. I think, one, I don't know of any state in the entire country that has as an extensive a voucher program as Arkansas currently does. So I'm proud of her. She's doing good.
Yes. Can we get Governor Sarah Huckabee to be governor of New York? We'd like that kind of educational choice.
You could use some help in New York.
Yeah, we sure
doubt,
could.
Senior. No doubt about it.
No, we need
I look
Sarah.
at some of the things that come from there and I scratch my head and I'm thinking, my, oh my. So I'll see when she finishes her term if she's willing to move to
you wonder, like, if New York was working, if everything was going well, then you don't understand why they embrace what they do. But it's not working well. But it is in Arkansas. Good for Sarah, and thank you for raising such a child. Now let's talk. Governor Huckabee is appearing in a movie, God's Not Dead, In God We Trust. First of all, how did you get involved with this movie, and what are your thoughts on who's its audience? What's its purpose? What's it about?
Monsignor, it's really for I'd say for everybody, but especially for Christian believers.
Okay.
There is a theme in this movie that is very timely. And the interesting thing about the timeliness of it is that this film has been in, I guess, development for several years, but they had COVID back, issues getting it done, and the writers' strike that slowed everything down. There's just one issue after another. But I think of the providence of God, it came out exactly when it needed to, because this film depicts the life of a pastor who is really invited to run for Congress, and it's a short special election. He's running against a career politician. And of course, all the criticisms come. Who gives you the right to run for office? You're a pastor. What are you doing involved in this? Very similar to my own experience. So I could relate to the story,
Right.
but it's a brilliantly written script and it's got a great cast. Here's the big message and the real takeaway. Christians often sit out civic engagement, and they
Yes.
do it because they think politics is dirty. I want no part of it. But that's exactly why it is so dirty, is because people
Mhm.
who have moral character, people who have convictions, whether it's about life and the sanctity of life,
Mm.
or whether it's about a justice system that's fair for all, um, people, when they sit it out, they end up getting the government they deserve. And it's rarely the government they wanted. So this is a great reminder. 40 million Christians in this country did not even vote in the last presidential election. When you think about the impact that just Christian believers would have, it would change every single election in America if they registered and then voted.
Governor, in fact, in September, I have the Board of Election coming into my church just to register people so that they can vote. And I'm hoping that every church around the country will do the same. Back in 1996, very much in keeping with your film, I was asked by the Republicans to run for Congress. And I went to see Cardinal John O'Connor at that point, and I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "No, you shouldn't." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because it's impossible to go into politics and not lose your soul." Now,
Mm.
as a man who believes very deeply in Jesus Christ, who went into politics, is Cardinal O'Connor overstating it, or how does one protect your soul in the context of politics?
Yeah, I would respectfully disagree with the Cardinal on that. I think it's not only possible, but it's critical to
Yeah,
maintain one's soul. And I believe that you could lose one's soul being in banking or being a
yeah,
police officer or
right,
being a stockbroker.
right.
Uh, One's soul has nothing to do with a vocation. It has to do with how connected we are to the one who owns our soul. That vocation is not about making money, making a name for myself. It is about serving to the glory of God. So if it is in politics, then I should be serving to the glory of God, and that'll keep me sane and rational. Now, to be fair, Monsignor, I've seen people who are delightful Christian people. They get into politics and they fall apart. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I would go by the same token. I've seen people uh, get into entertainment, get into the news business. I've seen them get into finance and they fall apart.
Yeah.
And what you really learn is it wasn't the vocation that got them, it was the fact that they weren't as connected to Jesus as they became connected to whatever the temptations were.
Governor, we've had recently both Mike Pence on as well as Josh Hawley, and the issue that came up in terms of losing your soul was the temptation, especially in Washington, to believe your own press or to allow people who want something from you to get too close to you. And how do you keep your family intact? As someone who has traveled extensively for his political life, how do you keep sanity and stability in terms of being both dad and husband when you're called into so many different directions?
Well, I could say that for me, part of it is that I have a very strong wife who, if I
Mm.
got too far off the track, would probably strangle me in the night. So my sheer fear of that has kept me straight in many ways. I think it's bigger than that. In
Yeah.
all fairness and all kidding aside, it's really about living your life consistently with the life you had before whatever it is that you are currently doing. And I find that when people change their habits, their lifestyle, they quit going to church, they quit reading their Bible, they quit praying. That's how you get in trouble.
Governor Mike Huckabee is our guest. The movie is God's Not Dead, and the subtitle, importantly, is that In God We Trust. Governor, when those moments come in church where I'm preaching about a moral perspective on a particular political issue, inevitably somebody who doesn't agree with me is going to say, don't you understand the separation between church and state? You can't bring that into the church. What do you say to that?
It's great that you bring that up because it's one of the really, I think, key moments in the film itself. because in the role that I play, which is playing myself and interviewing Pastor Dave, the congressional candidate, I ask him that question. I say, don't people say to you? Well, the truth is, the idea of separation of church and state is the opposite of what most people think it means. It comes from a phrase that Thomas Jefferson used in a letter that he wrote in 1803 to the Danbury Baptist Association in Danbury, Connecticut. And it was all about some rumor that was floating about that the government was getting ready to impose a state religion, or at least an official faith, likely the Episcopal faith. And so the Danbury Baptist Association wrote to Jefferson and said, we just want to clear up because we believe in religious liberty. Is there going to be a push to have a state-sanctioned denomination? To which Jefferson replied and said, no, because people of faith ought to be free to worship as they please, and they should be able to influence the government, but the government should never impose itself on the church. And here's where he used the phrase, because there is this wall of separation between church and state. So what Jefferson explicitly said, the church is free to speak to the state. In fact, it should speak to the state. It is the voice of conscience for the state. Churches should never be silent, should never act like that somehow they don't have a role in the public square. But the government should never cross that wall and to try to get into the church's business to tell a minister what he should preach, how the people should pray, how they should sing, how they should set up their church government, that is beyond the boundaries of what government can do. So it's a very important thing to push back when people use that phrase as a way of saying, hey, Christians just ought to stay out of this whole business of government. Quite frankly, Monsignor, I would say, no, Christians need to get a whole lot more involved. Yeah. And for years, I've said, look, everybody wants to eat from a clean plate, but that means somebody's got to do the dishes. So the fact is, if we want a better country, a better government, a government that respects the unborn, that believes in justice for all without regard to whether a person is rich or poor, black or white, then we better participate, because if we don't, we end up having a government that, quite frankly, we can't live with.
Governor Mike Huckabee, so I guess, Governor, you just touched on something I want to follow up. It's more in your personal story than the movie, but in your background, it's known that in the church where you were a pastor, you were deeply into inviting into the church a mix of races, black and white. And in your own race for president, very high numbers in terms of both running for governor and running for president, African-American voters. What is it about Mike Huckabee that is able, because not every Republican can, to bring the black community into saying, I like this guy. I don't care if he's Republican or Democrat. I just like what he has to say. What was the hook?
I think it was authenticity. I never pretended to have a different message when I was speaking to people of color than I did of anyone else.
Okay.
I sometimes would just cringe when I would see a political figure running for office. First of all, they would wait until the month before the election and then go and try to make an inroad into a community with whom they had no connection whatsoever. Suddenly, as if to create one, as to say, oh, I wanted to come over here and ask for your vote because, wink, wink, I've really always thought about you. No, you didn't, or you would have been here before.
Right.
So part of it is that. When I was governor, I probably spent a disproportionate amount of time and effort on people that didn't vote for me. A lot of the East Arkansas communities where it was predominantly African-American. But the fact was, Monsignor, many of those communities had very high rates, not only of education failure, but they had some of the most horrific health outcomes, high rates of hypertension, diabetes, heart disease. So we put really an extraordinary level of resources toward those communities because they had the greatest need. Northwest Arkansas, the home of places like Walmart and Tyson Foods, very prosperous part of the state. Those were the people that voted for me in large measure. They didn't need what the governor could do. They were doing fine. But the people in East Arkansas, they did. And so when I would do those kind of things, people aren't stupid. They can look for themselves. And they said, no governor has ever cared as much tangibly as you have. So in 2002, when I ran for re-election as governor, I got 48% of the African American vote. To my knowledge, no Republican, black or white, in any of the 50 states has ever received 48%
Yeah.
of the African American vote. I think it's maybe a record to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And what's frustrating is I try to tell the people at the Republican National Committee, folks, this is a constituency we ought to be connecting to.
Governor Mike Huckabee is our guest. This is off the topic, but on. I'm just intrigued. You talked about the life issue. I've tried to include among my friends those who call themselves pro-choice, primarily because I do want to understand like where you're coming from. We both know what's in the womb, so how do you come at it so differently? But another issue that in my church, maybe in yours as well, people are trying to understand because they don't want to demonize people. But have you been able to get your head around how we have to be tolerant, accepting, loving of people, even when they're promoting this whole transgender agenda? Because I know in my parish, people say, I feel bad for someone who's going through that confusion, but I can't see my way clear to in any way justifying the surgeries and the poisons that they're putting into kids today in the name of gender identity. Governor, I'm sure this is one of many issues that you have had to deal with. Do you have any advice for us on how we ought to be both loving, but at the same time say, wait a second, there's something here that's not making sense to me? How do you handle it?
You know, if one of my children, when they were small, had they been out in the yard playing and darted out into the street in busy traffic, I wouldn't have said, now you need to be more thoughtful and watch for those. I would have rushed out to the street, grabbed them, brought them to the curb, because I realized they are unaware of the danger that they are facing. It is not love when we accommodate people who are making decisions that not only are going to hurt them for the here and now, but hurt them for all eternity. We have an obligation to be honest if we really do love people. And so when I see people say, well, I don't want to offend someone who believes that it's okay for a 7-year-old to have his personal anatomy changed surgically, I'm thinking, hold on here a minute. There's a reason we don't let 7 and 8-year-old children have tobacco products or alcohol or give them keys to a car. There's a reason we don't let them. We don't even let them get tattoos at that age. Why? Because they're not mature enough to make those decisions. And we shouldn't think that someone, even if they're 12 or 13, is mature enough. Maybe they're just going through puberty. They have no idea the implications of a decision to be surgically mutilated or chemically castrated. And it may be 10 or 20 years and they'll say, what on earth have I done? Who let me do this? Who pushed me toward this? So, you know, if a person makes some decision like that when they're in their 20s, I would disagree with that decision. I'd say be the person God made you to be. Find a way to accept that. But if you make that as an adult, you know, I'm going to say this is your life. You have a right to do that. But not to intervene when we're talking about children. I don't understand how anyone can think that that's okay. It isn't okay. And the foundation from which we must come to this is the biblical foundation. You know, I tell sometimes my friends, they say, well, you sometimes are a little rigid. I say, I'm not more rigid than the Bible. That's all I got.
Yeah,
You know, my opinion of something isn't really that important, but God's word is incredibly important to me. I build my whole life on it. And if it says it in the book, I'm going to go with the book, not what I feel.
Thank you for that, Governor. It's an honest approach. You know, in places like New York and California, where they talk about making them states that are sanctuaries for young people who want to have surgery done and be chemically castrated, and the state is saying, and if your parents get in the way, we'll protect you and help you make that decision. It's like something worthy of the Soviet Union, and is very, very frightening. I promise we're going to wrap pretty soon. But one of the things about the movie that you're appearing in, God's Not Dead, In God We Trust, that you've highlighted today in this interview, and I want to go back to it, is this notion of 40 million Christians not voting in the last presidential election. I know in New York State, where I'm from, that many of my Christian and Catholic friends will say, well, New York's going to go Democrat anyway, so what's the point? What do you say in a state that is, a blue state, so-called, when they say it's not worth the time and effort because we have no chance of winning anyway? Your response to that is what?
Well, first of all, I never believed that you have to win in order to take the right stance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to win. I lost some elections. I've won most of my elections, but I didn't win them all. I could have said, look, this doesn't look real good for me. I'm going to sit this one out. But it was getting in the process that led to my getting elected. I had to lose an election before I would win one. Even beyond that, just as a voter, voting has taken a stand. And I think it's an obligation. It's not just an opportunity, it's an obligation that a person who says, I love Jesus, I believe in the Bible, I love my church, then vote like it. For heaven's sakes, take a stand. And that's what you do. And if all of the people who sort of resign themselves to, well, we can't win, continue to do that, then we never win. And that's why I urge people, keep taking the stand, keep trying to influence your friends, your relatives, people you work with, and your neighbors. And maybe one day you'll wake up and you will win.
Governor Mike Huckabee's been our guest. Governor, in the movie God's Not Dead, this whole concept of a clergyman getting involved in politics is part of the important theme. I mention that because I'm old enough and was a fan of Mike Huckabee long enough that I would see times when you'd come up against John McCain or Mitt Romney, and you'd win your primaries, you'd beat them, and yet they'd make a fuss over their victories, the media, but kind of downplay your victories. And I couldn't help but thinking, as a clergyman myself, I think that they're holding it against him that he was, a pastor. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. Governor, did the media hold it against you because you were in fact a person who says I've served God as a clergyman, no apologies? Did you suffer for that?
Absolutely. And there was sort of a sense of not being taken seriously by people in the secular media because they deem people who are pastors and priests and clergymen as people who really don't live in the real world. And what I would say to them is that there is no person in your community that has a better understanding of the social pathologies in
Yeah,
our world
that's
than
right.
your pastor does. Because when a young teenage girl gets pregnant and she's 15 and she hasn't even told her parents, there's a good likelihood that the first person she goes and talks to is her pastor. When there's an elderly couple who are struggling with not enough income to take care of even their most fundamental medical needs, and they have to start splitting pills, the person who knows what they're going through is their pastor. The pastor knows things about people in that community nobody else knows. And I would suggest no one, not a lawyer, not a teacher, not a doctor, not a police officer, has a better understanding of all of the realm of human life than does a pastor. He's been with families at their best moments, the birth of a child, the marriage of their daughter, and he's been with them through the worst. When the loved one slips off into eternity at ICU at 2 a.m, or when the young couple in their 20s, so excited about their future, and their 2-year-old drowns in the pool. It's the pastor who's there. It's the pastor who understands the heart and the heartbreak of every single person in that kind of community. He understands hunger because he's been in the houses delivering boxes of food to people that didn't have a thing in their cupboards. He knows what that looks like. So I always would push back when people would say, well, what is a pastor getting involved in? I say, you really ought to be praying that more of us did, because we'd have a much better perspective, not just on what's wrong with our culture, but why it's wrong and what messed it up. So it was true. I would often get questions in the debates that were so ridiculous. I'd get, as I would call them, the religious questions. Had nothing to do with being president, nothing whatsoever. And sometimes I'd push back. I remember telling Anderson Cooper in a CNN debate, he asked me something about creation. And I said, Anderson, I'm not sure what role the president of the United States has in creation. So I don't know, but I always get these religious questions. You never ask it of anyone else on this stage.
Right,
You ask it of me.
right.
I said, well, let me just go ahead and give you an answer. And I said, how did God do it? How long did it take him to do it? I haven't a clue. I wasn't there. But here's what I believe without any reservation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
I said, I built my life on that. How he did it, couldn't tell you. What was his methods? Don't have a clue. But I know he did it. And that's where I stand. the audience broke into an ovation. And it was in New Hampshire, of all places, not exactly the most religious state in the world.
Right.
But it was just, to me, offensive that he thought, oh, I'm going to get you on this one. You're going
Hmm.
to, give us this 5,000-year-old earth and make a fool of yourself. And I thought, no, don't plan on making a fool of myself. But if you're asking me, do I believe that we are the creation of God and not that he let us create him? And I think, said, if you want to believe that you descended from a primate, that's fine. Knock yourself out. But I believe I came from the mind, the heart, the will, and the love of God.
I'd like to thank Governor Mike Huckabee for being with us and personally speaking. I hope all our listeners and watchers will go and see God's Not Dead and God We Trust, opening up in September. A great movie, and the governor's given us insight into why we need to hear the message of the movie, especially if you're one of 40 million Christians who decided last time to sit out a presidential vote. And Governor, I remember years ago a movie and a play on Broadway called Mass Appeal, where the pastor is telling the people what they want to hear and makes them very popular until he's challenged by a seminarian who says, but you're here to tell people what they need to hear. I love this interview and love having you on because both in politics and in faith, that's what you've done time and time again. And I'm sure it's cost you. That question about creationism was not given to John McCain or Barack Obama by Anderson Cooper, but given to you. And you gave your answer with great foresight and also great fidelity to the truth. I just thank you for being that person who tells people, whether it works for you or not politically, what they need to hear, not necessarily what they want to hear. And I so wish there were more people in public life who are willing to do that. I thank you for doing that with us today and for your whole life of service to the kingdom as well as to our country. You're an amazing man, and we pray for you and we thank God for you. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Monsignor. It's an honor to get to visit with you again. And thank you for what you do, the stand you take, and the lives that you influence. It's a blessing to be with you.
Thank you, Governor. Thanks for being with us on Personally Speaking. If you need to reach me for any reason, you can do that at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. You probably listen to this program on the Catholic channel, 129. And you can do more than that. You can watch it as well on YouTube if you like by searching under Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. We're also on Facebook at Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. We're on Instagram at Personally Speaking Podcast. Please share and let others know about Personally Speaking. I'm delighted to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.